everyone. This is State Representative Kate Lipper-Garabedian. Thank you for joining me for another Conversations with Kate. I'm glad to be joined by Chris Redfern, the Executive Director of Friends of the Fells, and we're going to talk today about his work supporting our local state park and how the state and local policymakers and neighbors are really engaged together for such a critical asset in our community. So thanks for joining me, Chris.
Great to be here, Kate. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you and I are both relatively new to our positions. You at least had a few months to start to get involved before the pandemic occurred, but I'd love for people to learn a little bit about you. I think you've been the Executive Director for Friends of the Fells since September of 2019. Why don't you talk a little bit about your professional background and how you came to this role?
Sure. Well, I grew up outside. I love playing outside in nature as a kid. And actually grew up in New Jersey, not very far from here.
Right.
When I graduated from college, I worked in the software industry for about 10 years and then decided I really wanted to try to figure out how I could marry my love for the natural world with a calling and a way of making a living. So when my family moved down to San Diego, I decided to make the jump, and I transitioned to a position in the nonprofit sector working as the executive director for a small environmental organization called the San Diego Audubon Society.
Right.
I know we have Mass Audubon here, which is a huge entity and does great work here in the Commonwealth. San Diego, smaller, but still quite a lot to do there. So we did a lot of work on endangered species protection, habitat restoration, including coastal wetland restoration. And then also my favorite thing is getting kids outside in nature. So we did quite a lot of that work too.
That's great. I've been to San Diego twice. I recall once was as a child and went to the zoo there and just have a sense of that community being such a vibrant place to be outside. A little different and in different ways from New England, right? We have a little bit of a different climate, but that's really great to hear about your background. And so joining Friends of the Fells in September 2019, so you've been in this position for almost 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, I mean, probably most everyone in my district is familiar with the Fells insofar as having visited it, probably knows that it's a state park, but tell us a little bit about what Friends of the Fells does to sort of augment the state park.
Right. So, Friends groups typically support the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the agency that oversees our state parks. The Friends of the Fells has been around for over 2 decades, and I think probably in the earlier years, the organization was better known for its advocacy work and the community organizing around making sure that development didn't happen within the boundaries of the fells that might impact the habitat and the natural values of the space. More recently, we've really been focusing much more heavily on protecting and enhancing the biodiversity of the fells through endangered species work with our partner Earthwise Aware. So we're working on both habitat enhancement with endangered species with helping Earthwise Aware, as I said before, but also in collaboration with DCR working on invasive plants in the fells.
Sure, that makes sense. In fact, I'm familiar a little bit with that because of Melrose's public ponds and the invasive species we have there.
Yeah. Getting
some state funding to help with the cleanup.
Yeah, for sure. And then also looking at the trail system, there's many trails in the fells. Some of them authorized, some more social trails that are created by people who get lost or decide to go one way or another. And trying to limit the number of those, and especially if they're running through sensitive habitats, is another thing that we're really interested in. So that's been a really big area of focus, but also COVID actually has created, funnily enough, an opportunity really for us for growth in one of our larger program areas, which is our summer camp. So we have a Fells Forest Camp, and when the pandemic first hit in the spring of 2020, we pivoted pretty quickly to try to figure out, can we actually run camp in the first summer of the pandemic? And because it's an all-outdoor camp, we were able to scramble, find new locations, and comply with all of the numerous new health guidelines that we were needing to operate under. And we successfully ran camp for over 700 kids that summer. It was a big expansion of our program because so many of the other summer camp opportunities were gone.
Right.
So we are really grateful to be able to provide that opportunity for families and kids. The kids have been stuck, inside their houses all
You
spring.
and I both know that. We have younger kids, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really stressful, of course, but also really gratifying to be able to provide that opportunity. So that's been a real growth area for us, and we're continuing to grow that program as the pandemic continues to roll out. So
Certainly.
we'll be doing that again this summer
Yes.
as well.
Well, I know a number of families who really, their children had phenomenal experiences in 2020 and 2021 with the camps. So
Great. Good to hear.
It's good to know that they'll continue this summer as well, and I'm sure you'll have a huge demand for them.
Yeah.
That's great. You talked a lot about sort of protection of the biodiversity and the habitats, and I certainly recall, including through your presentations to the Legislative Fells Caucus, which has been convened, and I'm a member of that as the Melrose and Wakefield and Malden rep. We've talked a lot about sort of your work to inspire this culture of care and stewardship. The caucus was pleased to secure some additional funding for you in this current fiscal year on the Sustainable Fells campaign. So those are, a couple things that come to mind that connect the work that you're doing with how I can be supportive and, my colleagues as well. Are there other things you'd want, your policy leaders to be thinking about in terms of partnering with a Friends of the Fells organization or other, organizations like that around the state, including, of course, to your point, we have a tremendous state park system, the Fells being one of them. And I've, since being elected, really worked to convey to the budget leadership teams my passion for strong funding for the Department for Conservation and Recreation, because state parks turn out to be one of the safer, if not, safest ways in which to have an outlet during this pandemic. So what are some other things you'd want policymakers to be considering in addition to continued investment for the parks?
Well, I think, we are focused on that continued investment.
Yes.
We know that there was a DCR special commission that recently had been convened and released their final report, which was adopted unanimously by all the commission members. That report makes it very clear that DCR has been underinvested for many years, that there's $1 billion in backlog of maintenance for the facilities that DCR controls and stewards. And I think probably what I would like to emphasize is that when we think about parks, we often think about them kind of off by themselves, where they're actually integral to so many other aspects of the health and well-being of our communities. So in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation, trees keep our air clean, trees sequester carbon, trees can be places of refuge from urban heat islands in the summertime. And then, of course, we know that the pandemic has brought a lot of people into state parks. In some of the parks, 300% visitation over prior pandemic visitation. So the parks are showing their value also for the physical and mental health of our communities. So we can't think about them as something separate. They are integral to foundational elements of how we need to care for our communities, protect the planet, and address climate change. So all of those things are interconnected. And when we realize that, maybe we can think about, let's not ignore the fact that our parks are in desperate need of reinvestment.
I think that's right. And that's a long-going narrative, and attention has been needed over the course of many years. And we're seeing, as to your point, COVID really sort of shone a spotlight on that. I mean, it was one of the few places that I could take my young boys and feel comfortable in the last couple of years, and in every climate, every season we were out there, and as a place of refuge as well. And so maybe we could just talk briefly about this horrific event that happened, I believe, in November, with a really brutal attack on a person visiting the park. And I know that both DCR and the state police have been owning some responsibility for thinking through what are ways to respond to that event. And I know you also have been really thoughtful. Do you want to talk a little bit for folks listening about ways in which they can feel confident about visiting the state parks?
Yeah, I think, this ties back to the funding issue, because when you go into the Fells, it's very rare that you see a park ranger.
That's true.
In the Fells. It's not the park ranger's fault. There are park rangers, but there's way too few of them, and they have way too much other responsibility. So their ability to actually get into the trails versus dealing with all the parkway issues that they have to deal with and other things. They are great collaborators of ours, and we have really good relationships with the local operations folks. But they can't be out on the trails as much as they would like to be. If they were out there, there would be a better sense of there is a presence there. There's right now, because it's been probably over a decade of underinvestment in DCR and state parks, there's grown up into the fells this sense of kind of lawlessness. Like, you can go there and do whatever you want. There's nobody there watching. And people also may not know. They just may be not understand or be ignorant of what the rules and regulations are.
Well,
so,
like we were talking about earlier with respect to trails, right? People get lost, or they sort of plow through maybe a vernal pool, right?
Yeah. I mean, people might not know that dogs are not allowed off leash in the fells, except for in the sheepfold. But when you go to the fells, over 80% of the people are walking without their dogs on a leash, and people might not think that's a big deal, but over 40 people have been bitten by dogs in the fells, as recorded by one of our members who asked the community to provide some insight on what's going on in the fells around off-leash dogs. So it can be dangerous for folks, and it's safety issues. So when you think about this horrific incident that happened back in late November, obviously that's an isolated incident.
Right.
In general, the fells is a fairly safe place to be. But the general kind of lack of ability for the state to oversee the parks and provide some sort of enforcement presence, I think does play a role, and we have to think about that. But in terms of our organization, what we did was we felt it was really important to just listen to the community and let them express how they were feeling about what had happened. So we opened up a conversation on our Facebook page, and there were dozens of comments written in. And we responded to many of them. And what we realized were that many people were just feeling unsafe. They were feeling like they couldn't walk in the fells alone anymore. So what we did was we reached out to our volunteer corps, asked folks, would you be interested in just leading a social hike? You don't need to be an expert in geology or botany or whatever, birds. Just go out and just walk with people so people can feel safe and they can go in a group. And we were just amazed by the outpouring. We had over 20 people contact us, and we've been doing maybe 6 or 8 walks a month historically over this past, over 2021. In January, we had to walk almost every single day.
Wow.
Because folks came up and said, I want to do an LGBTQ hike. I want to do a women's only hike.
And this is January. And
this is January.
And we're not in San Diego.
I know. So it's just been so heartwarming to realize that people care and they want to provide opportunities for others and make people feel safe. And so we just feel so grateful to those volunteers that stepped up and are helping us to create more opportunity for people to continue to enjoy the fells in a group setting where they can feel safe and still enjoy the nature of the fells.
And really, there's also a benefit in just the social aspect of that potentially at a time when we have had such, isolation because of trying to protect our individual and the community health. So that's another added benefit for this that maybe will continue even as hopefully we ramp up some additional security protocols and protections for people. Yeah. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, I will just say one quick thing too. The new acting commissioner for DCR, Stephanie Cooper, has been very open to talking to us through these things. We have a meeting scheduled with her later this month to talk about potential ways that we can work together. So I've been very happy with her response. That's
really great to hear, and hopefully you'll be able to report to the Legislative Fells Caucus when we meet in a couple months as well about that. That's really exciting. Yeah. Anything else before we wrap, just about ways that we've talked sort of about what you want, from a state representative and the state delegation in terms of support. What about for people who just live in the community, ways that they can be involved or be supportive of your mission?
So we're always looking for folks that'll help us do work in the fells. We have a trail adopter program, so people can sign up to help us keep the trails clear and let DCR and us know if there are any kind of more major issues that they couldn't do themselves, down trees, that sort of thing. We also have a new strategic action plan that has a lot of initiatives that we would love to get going, but we kind of need to find volunteer leaders to help us in areas of fund development, communications, more conservation professionals that can help us continue to grow our science-based approach to how we do our habitat restoration and other ecological undertakings.
Okay.
So those are some ways. And then if, the other just things that you can think about when you're in the fells is try to stay on the trails that look like the big trails and not go off, and fragment the habitat. Try to think about keeping your dog on a leash.
Certainly.
Don't dump your yard waste into the fells. those are all simple things you can do to kind of help be a steward of the Fells as a community citizen.
Great. I'd be happy to share in my newsletter some links to where people could go to also think about being a volunteer in your Corps. So I'll do that maybe in an upcoming one.
That would be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Well, so obviously we have to be biased and say that the Middlesex Fells is our favorite state park, but maybe you could share with anyone listening what are one or two other state parks that you really have enjoyed, whether they're in Massachusetts or in other states that we might keep on our list of places to go and experience.
Yeah, my family, because we're new to the area,
Sure.
we've done quite a lot of exploring, not just in Massachusetts, but elsewhere. We love Pawtuckaway State Park
Okay.
Up in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Spent a lot of time in Vermont doing paddling over the summer, and there's great places up there for that. But closer to home, the DCR properties that we've enjoyed other than the Fells, we've been down to Borderland State Park recently. I don't know if you've been
I
there,
haven't.
but it's really nice. There's an old castle there. The Ames family
Okay.
built a castle down there. Now, of course, it's a historical property that
Right.
that DCR will hopefully open up at some point to visitation again. But the trails themselves are wonderful. They're nice and flat and wide. Great for families.
Good to know.
Great for walking your dog on a leash. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, those are some really good tips. I'm going to look those up and think about a time to take our family there. So
Sounds
thank you.
good. Yeah.
Well, Chris, it's lovely to get to meet you, I think, for the first time in person, right?
Yes, thank you so much.
This has
Yeah.
really been helpful, and want to thank you and all your volunteers and the organization for supporting such an important component of our local area of the Commonwealth, and also thinking about how it, as to your point, it's really integrated and integral to our overall health and well-being. So really grateful for all the leadership that you've brought to the organization, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Me as well, Kate. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us for Conversations with Kate. Be well.